Howdy, friends. I'm Joel Empey, and welcome to another episode of Joel Empey Talks NFL. And on today's episode, we're going to look at the number one must-watch game coming up in Week 11 in the NFL. We're going to look at best bets to make in Week 11 in the NFL, and we're going to look at defenses and quarterbacks to stream for fantasy football in Week 11. But first, we're going to start today's episode by talking about the utter shit show that is refereeing in the NFL in 2019. So I said that the officiating this year in 2019 has been an absolute shit show. And that's true, but it's also kind of true for every year. You know, every year there's major referee complaints in the NFL. Every year, fans feel like their teams are getting the end of the deal on, multiple calls. But this year, it's gone even further than in previous years. We even had Tom Brady on a Sunday Night Football game earlier on in the year. I forget which game it was exactly, but he tweeted during Sunday Night Football how he was sick and tired of all the penalties and he was turning the game off and that the referees were ruining the game. And Joe Buck and Troy Aikman actually brought it up on the broadcast. So it's like, it's mainstream recognized that the referees are doing a terrible job. They're just calling way too much. They're calling way too much ticky-tack stuff. They're clearly favoring offensive players like an astounding amount. The quarterback hit on Aaron Rodgers. I don't know if you guys saw that, but on Aaron Rodgers by Gerald McCoy, that should have been, it should have been a fourth down. For the Packers. They were deep in their own end. They would have been punting out of their own end zone, giving the Panthers the ball at least like the 50-yard line. The Panthers would have had a chance to even block the punt out the back of the end zone for a safety. You can't speculate on what the Panthers would have done per se, but the Panthers get absolutely screwed over on roughing the quarterback call, where Gerald McCoy does everything. Even Pereira, I believe, it might have been Blandino, was the NFL, Sterator maybe, was the NFL rules expert that was consulting for that game. And even that person was saying how McCoy did an exceptional job of not landing with his body weight on top of Rodgers. Yet, that call still happens. There's no recourse for the Panthers in that call. Even if there was recourse, referees aren't turning over what they called on the field. And that's another gigantic issue with officiating this year. Look at Minkah Fitzpatrick's, if you guys didn't see, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Pittsburgh Steelers, former Dolphin, hell of a player, picks up a fumble and runs for a touchdown against the Rams. Picks up a fumble and runs for a touchdown. It was clearly an incomplete pass. But referees are being told that because if it was a fumble and you call it an incomplete pass, then wherever the defense recovered the ball, they can't advance it from that point forward. So even if you do review the play afterwards and it's like, oh, sorry, we called it an incomplete pass, but it was actually a fumble, the defense can't return that ball forward for a touchdown. So they're just letting these like borderline incomplete pass, borderline fumble situations just play out. So that way the defense has an opportunity to return it for a touchdown. So that way you don't screw the defense out of that opportunity. But then the gigantic issue of erring on that side with those calls, erring towards just letting it be a fumble so that way you don't screw over the defense, is that the referees are also told to err on the side of going with the call on the field if there isn't, quote, clear and obvious, end quote, evidence against the call on the field. So they're being told, hey, err on the side of this situation, letting a fumble go, even if you thought it was an incomplete pass, just so you don't screw over the team. Like the Saints got screwed over earlier this year against the Rams. So they don't want to screw over defenses. So they say, okay, well, err towards the side of just letting a play out and letting a fumble play out, even if you thought it was an incomplete pass. And then we can review it and, fix it in post, so to speak. But then the issue is that they're saying, hey, in post, when you're reviewing a play, err on the side, if it's 51-49, err on the side of the call on the field to give those referees, some semblance of power. if you will. The whole referee situation is just a gigantic mess. I don't know, like, the whole clear and obvious thing is just a disaster because they're never overturning any of these pass interference things. You can't challenge certain things like, a roughing the passer. You can't challenge that. And even if you could challenge it, the whole clear and obvious thing, those challenges would never get overturned. Just like the pass interferences, now that people can challenge them, they're never getting overturned this year. It's just a giant shit show. The whole challenging situation is a giant shit show. Like, I don't know. I think it should be one challenge, and if you get that challenge right, you keep it. But we need to get rid of this clear and obvious bullshit. Like, if it looks one way, it doesn't have to be super duper clear and obvious. Just like go with what your gut says. If you watch it and it looks a certain way to you, call that. Even if it's like you're only 49% sure, but refereeing is just a total shit show. I don't know how to fix it, but I do know that it's ruining football. It's making games less enjoyable to watch. It's slowing the pace of the game. It's clearly offensive favored. Massively slanted towards the offense, which is just annoying to watch as a football fan because you want to see a fair game be called. And these defensive backs are, getting pass interference calls on them for nothing. Like, it's just unbelievable. Meanwhile, Amari Cooper clearly pushes off in the end zone on Sunday Night Football, but because he's an offensive player, that doesn't get called. If that was a defensive player with this same exact push-off, that's getting called 10 out of 10 times. Offensive player, it's 1 out of 10 times. So the rules are just in shambles right now. They need to completely overhaul the system. The one nice thing about the NFL is that they do seem to make alterations every year. I just hope that they start making the correct alterations because some of these alterations that they're making over the last couple of years are clearly bringing the NFL in the wrong direction. Now, on this show, I usually like to take a segment to look forward to the upcoming games in the upcoming week and pick out the ones that I'm most interested in, ones that really pique my interest and really have me salivating to watch. And this week, there's really only one game that does that to me, which is a little bit unfortunate. It's just one in Week 11. But, man, it's a hell of a game. And that is the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Houston Texans. Ravens versus Texans is just going to be an epic matchup. That could be a matchup that we see, year in and year out in the AFC for the coming years, just based off of how talented and young Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson both are. It seems like both these guys are going to be in position to be putting their teams in the driver's seat in their divisions every single year. And if you know how the NFL schedule works, if you're in the AFC and you place first in your division, you have to play all of the other AFC teams that finished first in their division. So I suspect this Texans and Ravens matchup, it's going to be not Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, but it's going to be like the athletic version of Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, going forward. So I think that this is going to be a special matchup every time these guys play. Watching these two just cheat code athlete quarterbacks compete against one another, go head to head, is just going to be just must watch TV. Both these guys, anecdotally right now, are top 5 in the MVP conversation. I would say Russell Wilson's first, and I would say Christian McCaffrey second, and then I would put these guys, Lamar and Deshaun, right there at 3 and 4. So they're going to be taking on each other. And then both teams have great defenses. The Ravens average giving up 21 points per game, and the Texans are right there with them at just 21.2 points per game. Offensively, these two teams are second in yards per game. The Ravens are second in yards per game, and the Texans are fourth in yards per game. And then offensively, these teams are also, Ravens are first in points per game, and the Texans are 8th in points per game. So these teams both, put up big points. They both have stingy defenses, so something's got to give there. They both put up tons of yards. They both have MVP level quarterback play right now. I feel like this is not only just going to be an epic quarterback matchup for the next 5-10 years to come in the AFC, but this might also be an excellent preview of a potential AFC playoff matchup, because I don't know about you, especially after the Colts. I mean, I can't believe that the fucking Dolphins beat them. That's so brutal, man. That hurts. Yeah, with the Colts playing as bad as they're playing, I think the Texans are a shoo-in to win that division now. And then the Ravens, they don't have any threats in their division. So these teams are both very likely going to win their division, both very likely going to the playoffs. I would almost say guaranteed going to the playoffs. So this could be a potential AFC playoff preview matchup. I can't wait for this game. Must-watch game of the week by far in a way. Can't wait for this game. Now, looking at bets of the week for week 11, I've got 3 bets, kind of a 4th bet that you could take or leave going into this week. My number 1 bet of the week. Actually, first off, let's address last week. I can't believe that the Browns beat the Bills by 3 points in a 2.5 point. Like, how are the Browns at 2-6 that have been a horrendous football team all year, 2.5 point favorites against the Bills, 6-2, have had a great season so far, and then the Browns win by 3 in a 2.5 point spread to just break the spread. And, Buffalo misses that field goal at the end. Freaking Cleveland can't do shit all game, and they score the touchdown to go up by the perfect amount to get the 3-point lead. When it's 16-12, they go down the field, take up that an immense amount of time, score the touchdown when they haven't been able to do anything all day, go up by 3 to cover the spread of 2.5 points. Like, how does the Vegas odd makers know that? Like, how could they have possibly, this is why gambling is rough, because how did they know the Browns are going to win by 2.5? That seemed like such a shoo-in of a bet. It's not that the Browns were incapable of beating the Bills, but just logically that they were favorites against the Bills was just preposterous. But then the fact that they perfectly beat the spread by 0.5 point. Man, odds makers are on it, bro. They are on it. They know what they're doing. That's why gambling's a dangerous, dangerous game. But anyways, here are my bets of the week for week 11. My number 1 bet of the week is the Vikings -10 versus the Broncos. Now, you might think, Vikings -10. 10 is a lot of points. The Broncos have, a decent defense. They can be stingy. 10 points against the Broncos defense might be tough. But just look at the Vikings wins this year. The Vikings are 7-3 this year, and their wins are by the following margins. They won by 16 over Atlanta, 20 over the Raiders, 18 over the Giants, 18 over the Eagles, 12 over the Lions, 10 over the Redskins, and then last night, their smallest margin of victory, just 4 points over the Cowboys. So they're 10-point favorites against the Broncos. Every single game this year that they've won, with the exception of the Cowboys, who are another playoff team that they were playing in prime time, where Kirk Cousins is generally terrible, and they were playing in Dallas, is the only time this year that they haven't won by at least 10 points. So a 10-point spread sounds like a lot, but when you break it down, the Vikings have been stomping these middle to low-level teams all year. They've beaten everybody by over 10 points, And then, the Vikings, if you were to look at the Broncos defense and you were to say, what is the one area that you can attack, because the Broncos have an immensely good pass defense, it's their run defense. It's more of a middling run defense. And then you look at the Vikings, they have the 3rd best rushing offense in the NFL, averaging over 153 yards per game. They're also the 3rd most rushing touchdowns in the NFL this year. So they have the offense to be able to attack the Broncos in their run game, so Von Miller can't pin his ears back, get after the quarterback. Chris Harris Jr. taking out the best wide receiver in the game like the Broncos can do. That doesn't really help them if Dalvin Cook's just punching them in the mouth over and over like Dalvin Cook's been doing all year, right? And then offensively, the Broncos, they don't have Flacco anymore, which is crazy. So, they've downgraded from Flacco in the passing game. So did you trust Flacco to really be able to put up consistent, good passing stats? No. And they've downgraded from him. And then they've also traded away Emmanuel Sanders. So they've downgraded at wide receiver. And then obviously they've got Royce Freeman and Phillip Lindsay, both very competent running backs. But you look at Minnesota's rush defense, they've given up the fewest rushing touchdowns this year, only 2 rushing touchdowns, and they've played 10 games. They haven't had a bye yet. In 10 games, they've let in just 2 rushing touchdowns, and they also give up only 91 rushing yards per game. So they've got maybe the best run defense in the NFL, top 5 without a doubt. So I just think the Broncos are going to struggle to even hit double digits in this game. Like 10 or 13 points will be, that's like the most I really picture the Broncos being able to score. Meanwhile, I think the Vikings will easily hit mid-20s, high 20s, even into the 30s, or maybe even more, with the way that they can wear this defense down with the run game. I think it could be a really long day for the Broncos. I love the Vikings -10, especially considering, once again, Vikings margins of victory so far this year in their 7 victories: 16 over Atlanta, 20 over the Raiders, 18 over the Giants, 18 over the Eagles, 12 over the Lions, just 10 over the Redskins. So that was the 10 over the Redskins, and then the 4 over the Cowboys would be 2 games where they wouldn't have beaten a 10-point spread. But I expect that they'll beat it this time. My next bet of the week is under 50.5 points in Atlanta at Carolina. It's the 3rd highest over-under projection of the week. And I mean, I see why in a way, because Atlanta has a high-flying offense, right? They typically score quite a bit. And they have a bad defense typically, so a lot of people score highly on Atlanta, which also forces Atlanta to try to keep up. So typically Falcons games are higher scoring, right? Because of the virtue of their good offense and bad defense. But Carolina has a really good pass defense. The way to beat Carolina is by running the football. They have the worst run defense in the NFL in terms of touchdowns allowed, and I believe on other metrics as well, but at least in terms of touchdowns allowed, they are the worst run defense in the NFL. I think Green Bay just put up a huge game against Carolina, but that was Aaron Jones getting 3 touchdowns on the ground. Aaron Rodgers had 0 touchdowns through the air, and that was with Davante Adams back. So, and Aaron Rodgers has been pretty hot lately. Sure, like last week he wasn't so hot, but a couple weeks prior, he's been heating up lately. He's been a guy that people have been rolling out in fantasy football without question, right? And he had 0 touchdowns against this Panthers D. This Panthers D is tough against the pass. They're first in the NFL in sacks, 36 sacks in 9 games. That's an unbelievable stat line. And then Atlanta has a terrible offensive line. They've given up 65 quarterback hits this year, 6th worst. So their O-line isn't good. The pass rush on Carolina is phenomenal. The way to attack Carolina's defense is through the run game, but Atlanta doesn't have a run game. They don't have an O-line. Devontae Freeman's banged up. So they're going to have to attack Carolina in the pass game, which has been very hard to come by so far this year. And then you have to, on Carolina's side of the football, I mean, Atlanta did just put up a great week against the Saints. Now, I think that was maybe a bit of an outlier of a week. It was just an outlier performance that I don't think they'll be able to replicate regularly. But they did just have a good performance. And we do know that Carolina Panthers offense isn't like infallible. It's not crazy good. I mean, Christian McCaffrey's playing at an MVP level. DJ Moore is really turning into a quality wide receiver. Kyle Allen's using him pretty well. Greg Olsen, veteran threat, knows the tricky, sneaky ways to get open, so on and so on. But it's not like Carolina's this high-flying offense that you expect to put up, 30 points, which their implied total this week is 28.25. And, maybe they could hit that against Atlanta, but I don't think they'll even hit that. I think that they'll probably hit somewhere more in the low to mid 20s, and I would imagine that, Atlanta will probably finish somewhere in the teens type of a situation. So, this is why I said there's kind of a fourth bet. I also don't hate Carolina -6. I think that there's a good chance that Carolina will cover the 6 points. But what the bet that I really like is the under bet in this one. Once again, I see it, Carolina maybe putting up that 28 points, 21 to 28, in Atlanta, maybe in the 14 to 20 range. But, even at that, if Atlanta hit that 20, like my upper end projections say, and my upper end projections of Carolina 28 hit, that's only a 48 total, and the over-unders at 50.5. So I love the under bet in this one. I also kind of like Carolina -6. If you like that bet too, I would go with both of those. And last but not least, I love the Bears +7 at the Rams Sunday Night Football. And it's tough, man. It's tough to say that you love the Bears with how inept their offense and Mitch Trubisky have been lately. But man, did you watch the Rams yesterday? They were fucking terrible. Jared Goff is horrendous at quarterback. He's inaccurate. He's unconfident. He's just terrible. The offense is an absolute joke right now. And that was against Pittsburgh, who has a good defense. But guess what? You know, the Bears defense isn't as good as they were last year, but they're still a really good defense. So Jared Goff in the Rams, just horrendous, horrific offense right now. And you're going to give me them against an elite defense and they're 7-point favorites. I just love attacking basically this Rams situation right now. I just don't think that they're very inept on offense. They're super incompetent. It's not that I'm very confident that, you know, Mitch Trubisky is going to lead the Bears to a great victory here, but you're going to give me a whole touchdown and it's Goff against a quality defense at this point in Goff's career, at this point in the Rams, where the Rams are at this point in the season. I just love an elite defense against the Rams when you're giving me 7 points. I'll take any high-quality defense against the Rams with 7 points. It's not a ton of analysis on this one. It's just that jumps out of the page at me when I see the Bears +7. I know the Bears have been bad recently, offensively very inept themselves, but dude, and the Rams can't run the football, which is the way to attack the Bears defense. You know, Gurley looked terrible yesterday even. You know, they couldn't even run the football. They can't throw the football. It's going to be bad for them. I love the Bears +7. That's probably my number one bet of the week. This week in Fantasy Talk, we're just going to look at streaming defenses and quarterbacks because I'm just sick and tired of the tight end situation. I'm done. If you want tight end analysis, you're going to have to go somewhere else. My number one streaming defense of the week is the Jets at the Redskins. Basically, streaming defenses, right, is as much about, if not even more, about attacking bad offenses compared to finding the best defense. And I know the Jets aren't the best defense, but the teams that we're going to be attacking right at this point, it's no longer the Dolphins. Fitzpatrick is competent at quarterback. He actually gives the Dolphins a chance to win games. The Redskins right now, if Dwayne Haskins is out there, I don't think he's competent. I don't think he gives them a chance to win games. I think he's just going to hemorrhage points to opposing defenses. And I feel the same way about rookie quarterback Ryan Finley with the Bengals. Until these two guys, Haskins and Finley, show us otherwise, these are the two offenses to attack every single week, if possible. So the Jets taking on the Redskins this week. The Jets just put up 6 sacks, had multiple turnovers against the New York Giants, who are a much better, much more competent team. Daniel Jones has looked a lot better than Dwayne Haskins has in Dwayne Haskins' short career sample size. Daniel Jones has looked pretty competent. He's looked capable. He's looked confident. He's been good. And the Jets just had a great week against them. They also got the defensive touchdown, which, I'm not going to predict that they get 6 sacks and multiple turnovers and a defensive touchdown all against the Redskins, but I think multiple sacks, multiple turnovers is basically guaranteed. And with Haskins' inability to take care of the football out there, the chances of a touchdown are higher against the Redskins than against any other offense, I would say. So you can't predict a defensive touchdown, but if any game is going to get a defensive touchdown, I would say the Jets against the Redskins might have the best chance. But even at that, you can predict multiple sacks, multiple turnovers, which that alone would make the Jets a playable defense this week, a top 12 defense this week. And they're only 21% owned, so you should probably go out there and get the Jets if you need a defense this week. My second streaming defense for the week, I kind of hinted at it in that first one. It's the Raiders against the Bengals. Like I said, as long as, if teams like the Jets and the Raiders, middling, low-level defenses. The case of the Raiders, I think they're like 3% owned, right? Very low-level defenses in terms of fantasy value. But it's about attacking these horrible matchups, right? These bad offenses. So the Raiders right now, they're an underrated team, and in general. But right now, they have 3 consecutive weeks with multiple sacks. They have multiple turnovers in their last 2 games. And, that's against like Detroit and the Chargers and the Texans, I believe. And those are all better teams than the Bengals at this point, right? So if the Raiders can put up multiple sacks and multiple turnovers against those teams, don't you think that they'll be able to put up at least that level of production against the Bengals? And once again, you can't predict defensive touchdowns, and the Raiders did have a defensive touchdown last week, just like the Jets had a defensive touchdown last week. So, you can't predict that to happen again, but once again, they did just prove that they can do it, just like the Jets did, and they're taking on an inept offense that's going to give them the best possible opportunity to do it again. And if either of these teams hit on a touchdown, they're going to be top 5 defenses. And even without a touchdown, just the multiple sacks, multiple turnovers, as I said with the Jets, should make the Raiders a top 12 performance. They should be in your lineup in DFS formats for sure. And in regular season-long leagues, if you need a defense for this week, they're literally like 3% owned. You have basically a guaranteed availability of the Raiders, and I would basically guarantee they'll be a top 12 defense because that's how bad the Bengals are. And if they can get a defensive touchdown, which they proved they're capable of last week, then they could be a top 5 defense. Looking at quarterbacks to stream in week 11, my number one option is going to be most people's number one option. He's pretty highly available, but not as available as the other quarterbacks I'm going to list after this. And like I said, he's going to be most people's top option. So if you don't have a high waiver priority, you might not be able to get this guy. The guy I'm talking about is Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy, I'm recording this before Monday Night Football, so maybe he, gets injured or something and, can't even play next week, and this whole talk about him is irrelevant. But Jimmy Garoppolo just played the Cardinals 2 weeks ago. Cardinals give up the most points per game to fantasy football quarterbacks, 28 points per game to fantasy football quarterbacks. That's just on average, 28. That's insanity. And you look back at 2 weeks ago, what Jimmy Garoppolo put up against these Cardinals, he put up 28 points. So he put up exactly what they're averaging. So even if you don't meet the average, like if you put up 20 points, 20 points is a good quality fantasy week. And I do worry about the upside of Jimmy being able to hit that 28 type of a point again, because, obviously the game script for this game is going to be heavy run the ball, right? Last time Jimmy was able to throw 4 touchdowns and 0 picks against this team, but I imagine that it's going to be a heavy run the ball game plan in this one. And, so you worry about the attempts that Jimmy's going to put out there. You wonder about, the potential upside, even though he did just have a 4 touchdown, no pick game against these guys and put up 28 points 2 weeks ago. You worry if he's going to be able to hit that same kind of an upside. But I think he's an extremely safe floor play just because of how many points per game the Cardinals give up, and because just 2 weeks ago he had such an exceptional game against them. He's capable of doing it. They're capable of giving it up. The Niners potentially will throw the ball enough to get him the points because they just did it 2 weeks ago. So because of his high floor and also high ceiling, right? Like they did just throw 4 touchdowns and 0 picks against this team 2 weeks ago. 28 points is no joke. That's a lot of fantasy points. He does have a high upside, although I don't think the chances of him hitting on that upside are very high because I do believe it'll be a heavy run script in this game. But regardless, I love Jimmy Garoppolo this week. I think he's a top 10 fantasy play. Now, this next guy, a little bit more available, also has a really high floor and a pretty high upside taking on the Cincinnati Bengals this week is Derek Carr. The Bengals are the 5th worst team against opposing quarterbacks, so they give up a ton of points to opposing quarterbacks. And that's with them losing every single game. So think about it. If like their team was actually competitive, they would give up even more points to opposing quarterbacks. But because they're losing so badly, teams will just run the ball against them and not even expose their defense as much as they potentially could, right? They average giving up 25.1 fantasy points per game. Yikes, that's a lot. Derek Carr, before last week, this past week, he only had a 1 touchdown game. But before last week, he had 3 consecutive multiple touchdown games, all against better defenses than he's going to face against the Bengals. And in the last 4 weeks, he has no turnovers. Derek Carr has no turnovers in the last 4 weeks. That's unbelievable, man. No picks, no fumbles lost. That's unbelievable. His ability to take care of the football is truly great. He's playing high-level football right now. Derek Carr and the Raiders are a sneaky, sneaky team. They're not being given the credit they deserve. They could sneak into the playoffs here still. They're not a bad football team. They're just not the sexiest. Like, Derek Carr hasn't been the best in fantasy football, even though he's been really good at real football as of late. But his ability to take care of the football, so you're not you don't have that risk of negative points like you do with a quarterback like a Josh Allen, right? And then the Bengals' propensity for giving up massive amounts of points. I think that Derek Carr, he had multiple touchdowns in 3 consecutive weeks before this most recent week. So I think that, against the Chargers, who also had a good week against Aaron Rodgers the week before, right? So I think he's going to be in line for another multiple touchdown game like he was doing consecutively before this past week against a really bad Bengals defense. And I'm also going to project that he has no turnovers because he hasn't had any turnovers in the last 4 weeks, and this Bengals defense is horrendous. So if he has multiple touchdowns and no turnovers, he's going to hit at least 20 points. And the Bengals average giving up 25 points per game. So I think he's got a good shot at hitting that 25 points. If he hits that 25 points, you're going to be happy that you started Derek Carr this week. He's widely available. And like I said, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be most people's top option, and he's less available. So you might want to just circumvent, going after Garoppolo and just go straight for Derek Carr. With your top waiver priority this week. I love Derek Carr this week taking on the Bengals. Great fantasy quarterback streaming option. Now, my last streaming quarterback option, not the sexiest pickup, that's for sure, but desperate times call for desperate measures. And at only 10% owned across ESPN leagues, Kyle Allen is a worthwhile pickup this week if you need a guy and you need somebody who's highly available. Because either you have a low waiver priority or there's just a ton of quarterbacks owned in your league or whatever. If you need a guy who's basically guaranteed going to be out on the waiver wire that you can go pick up, Kyle Allen is the guy. Now, the Falcons give up the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 25.4. That's a lot. If you look at Kyle Allen, he hasn't had a great year. He's had basically 2 good fantasy performances, one against the Cardinals, one against the Bucs. Cardinals give up the most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Bucs give up the 3rd most, so the Falcons at 4th most. They're right in that wheelhouse of being just horrendous to where even Kyle Allen can expose that defense. Then you look at DJ Moore. Kyle Allen's really gelling with him lately. And then the fact that Kyle Allen can just dump down a little screen pass to Christian McCaffrey, and McCaffrey goes 90 yards for a touchdown, and boom, there's a 7 in a point something point play for Kyle Allen. So the lack of talent on the Atlanta defense mixed with the playmakers on Carolina, mixed with Kyle Allen's lack of ownership in fantasy leagues generally, make him a really safe, usable option for this week. Now, it is worth noting, Atlanta did just put up a good defensive performance last week, but I stated this earlier, I think that was a bit of an outlier of a performance. I don't think that's a performance that they can replicate regularly. So I'm not too worried about that. I think Kyle Allen is a pretty safe floor play, not a greatly high ceiling, but if you need a guy like a 1-week starter, you could do worse than Kyle Allen. He's going to be widely available, And he should finish, I think he'll definitely finish top 15 quarterbacks this week. Might be able to finish in the top 12. Like I said, not the highest ceiling, but I think the Falcons defense offers a pretty high floor. And like I said, it's just the potential of, he's got good playmakers with DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey, number 2 in the MVP race right now, in my opinion. Greg Olsen can, use his tricky veteran techniques to get open in the red zone to give Kyle Allen, that touchdown pass. I think that, multiple touchdown passes could be in store for Kyle Allen, and I don't think the Falcons defense is going to really be one to get a takeaway. So I like Kyle Allen this week as a desperate streaming option. That does it for this episode of Joel Empey Talks NFL. I want to thank you for watching this episode. Please like the video if you did enjoy it. Subscribe to my channel. That helps out a lot. I would also really appreciate it if you followed me on Twitter at Empey Talks. You can see my opinions on NFL and UFC more regularly over there. Comment below any comments you have about the video I made today. And until next time, cheers, friends.